Earth did not die in fire alone, it died in silence that followed. The skies were still blue in places, oceans still moved, but the world had been broken at its spine. Orbital rings lay shattered, falling like slow meteors. Cities that once glowed at night became dark constellations of ash. Billions survived, yet every survivor carried the same weight, the certainty that Earth had been struck not by accident, but by decision. The attackers never spoke to humanity. There was no declaration, no demand, no ritual of conquest. A coalition of distant powers arrived, executed a calculated annihilation, and departed as efficiently as surgeons leaving a corpse. They did not finish the job because they did not need to. Earth was left alive enough to remember, weak enough to never matter again. That was the intention. Across shelters, stations, and drifting refugee arcs, humans absorbed the truth without screaming. Grief came, but it did not explode. It compressed. Memorial signals filled the void where broadcasts once lived. Names were spoken only once, then archived forever. Children learned silence before they learned history. Every human settlement, from lunar vaults to outer colonies, understood the same thing at the same time: nothing in the galaxy was coming to save them. For a long while, humanity did nothing that looked like resistance. There were no fleets launched in anger, no furious messages hurled into the void. Shipyards repaired hospitals instead of warships. Engineers rebuilt air and water before weapons. To outsiders watching from afar, it appeared obvious. Earth had been humbled. Humanity was folding inward, licking wounds, preparing to fade into irrelevance. They were wrong. What humanity rebuilt first was not cities, nor fleets, nor armies. It rebuilt memory. Every sensor log from the attack was preserved. Every maneuver, every energy signature, every hesitation was studied. Survivors were not encouraged to forget. They were asked to remember precisely. The dead were not turned into symbols. They were treated as data points, each loss carrying information that could never be wasted. There was no single council that vowed revenge. No leader stood before cameras to promise retribution. The decision emerged everywhere at once, quiet and unanimous. Humanity would answer, but not emotionally, not quickly, and not loudly. Rage was acknowledged, then set aside like a dangerous tool to be used later with care. As years passed, something subtle changed. The way humans spoke about the stars hardened. Exploration maps became targeting charts. Supply routes were redrawn with redundancy that bordered on paranoia. Entire economic models were rewritten around endurance instead of growth. Colonies accepted shortages without protest. Populations trained without ceremony. Nothing was announced, because nothing needed to be. Other species continued their routines, convinced the matter was settled. Earth was wounded, not extinct. Wounded things heal or die, and everyone assumed they knew which path humanity would take. No one noticed the shift in production curves, the silent synchronization of distant systems, or the fact that humans stopped asking permission to exist. By the time the galaxy realized humanity was no longer grieving, it was already too late to matter. Earth had been scarred, yes, but scars do not weaken bone. They mark where it survived pressure that should have shattered it. Humanity did not swear vengeance aloud. It simply ensured that the universe would never again mistake restraint for helplessness. No monuments were raised in those early years. Stone and metal felt dishonest while work remained unfinished. Instead, humanity marked the loss through action, through preparation, through patience sharpened into doctrine. Every calculation carried a quiet promise. Every delay was intentional. The universe believed the chapter had ended with Earth bleeding in the dark. Humanity knew better. Beginnings are often mistaken for endings by those who stop watching. They did not stop, they did not forget, and they did not forgive, because survival demanded memory longer than grief alone without witnesses. The Armada began not with fanfare, but with calculation. Shipyards across the solar system, long dormant or repurposed for civilian use, roared back to life. Modules once intended for orbital mining transformed into warships. Entire factories stripped of luxury, stripped of comfort, poured every resource into hulls, weapons, engines, and shields. Humans worked in shifts measured not in hours, but in cycles of precision, coordination, and efficiency. There was no debate, no politics, no hesitation. Every decision was a vector, every action a step toward one singular purpose: readiness. By the time the first starships slid into orbit, humanity had already exceeded any galactic standard for fleet size or scale. 900,000 warships, each tailored for its own specific role, stretched from Earth to Mars, out past Jupiter's belts, and into deep space colonies. They were not uniform, because uniformity breeds predictability. Some vessels carried overwhelming firepower but moved sluggishly, others were fast and fragile, designed to strike and vanish in moments. Drones filled gaps between hulls. AI coordination linked every vessel into a single operating mind, 1,000 brains operating as one. The fleet was not elegant. It was terrifyingly functional. Every ship represented more than steel and energy. Each was a culmination of sacrifice. Cities contributed resources stripped bare. Colonies repurposed habitats, pulling apart life-sustaining infrastructure to feed production lines. Humanity did not apologize for the cost. It acknowledged it and continued. Engineers and scientists who had once designed machines to extend life now designed machines to end it on an industrial scale. Children were born under the hum of assembly lines that would outlast them. Entire generations learned to measure value not in wealth or comfort, but in contribution to the fleet's creation. The sheer scale of the Armada alone was enough to unsettle the galaxy. Observers could not believe humanity had recovered so quickly, let alone produced such numbers. Even enemies who prided themselves on strategy assumed a fleet of this size could only be a reaction born of desperation, and desperation is sloppy. They expected noise, chaos, and errors. What they did not anticipate was precision on a planetary scale, discipline honed through collective trauma, and coordination that made nearly 1 million vessels operate as if connected by thought alone. As the fleet moved into formation, it revealed not just its size but its philosophy. Humanity did not parade its power. Ships did not flash signaling beacons, nor did they make declarations. They moved with the quiet inevitability of natural forces. Observers could track them, catalog them, fear them, but they could not understand them. The fleet's organization was simultaneously simple and incomprehensible, its pattern predictable to no one outside of the human collective. Every course, every formation, every timing had been calculated not for spectacle but for absolute efficiency. In parallel, humans perfected redundancy. No single failure could compromise the fleet. Engines, power sources, command systems were layered in triplicate, quadruplicate, sometimes more. Ships could operate independently or in unison. Supply lines stretched across solar orbitals, asteroid belts, and abandoned stations, all synchronized to ensure no vessel would ever run dry of fuel, ammunition, or purpose. Humanity treated logistics as war itself, understanding that numbers alone were meaningless without the precision to apply them at the exact right moment. The Armada's final revelation lay not in its firepower but in its patience. It existed in readiness, silent and unassuming, while the galaxy assumed Earth was still grieving, still disorganized, still inferior. Every day of calm was a day of accumulation, intelligence refined, crews trained, weapons perfected, and every calculation stress-tested across the fleet. 900,000 warships were not a statement. They were a promise, quiet and unyielding, that the moment humanity decided, the universe would see consequences it could not ignore. By the time the Armada left the solar system, it was more than a fleet. It was an embodiment of humanity itself, relentless, disciplined, and perfectly prepared to do what the galaxy believed impossible. The enemy expected an aggressive display. Their calculations assumed humans would attack immediately, fueled by rage or desperation. They prepared formations, deployed interceptors, and activated layered shields designed to crush anything approaching. Intelligence analysts noted the Armada's size, predicted engagement strategies, and concluded that a conventional battle would be swift. They believed the humans were predictable, driven by emotion, and limited by their technology. They could not have been more wrong. As the fleets approached one another across the void, human vessels moved with deliberate slowness. There was no fanfare, no signature energy bursts to declare intention. Sensors picked up formations, yet nothing matched the enemy's expectations. Ships rotated, adjusted, and maintained positions not for display, but to optimize potential unseen variables. Enemy strategists could chart patterns, but human logic was not logic in their terms. It operated on principles they could not anticipate, built from a combination of experience, instinct, and meticulous preparation. The enemy tested the humans first with probes, expecting to find weaknesses in weapon calibration, propulsion, or command hierarchy. Each probe returned with data that surprised them. The humans had anticipated the probe's paths, countered their scanning, and manipulated their emissions to mislead any observation. What seemed like hesitation was instead orchestration. Every movement, every pause, every apparent oversight was deliberate. It forced the enemy to miscalculate, overextend, and question their own assumptions. Humanity's strength lay in the absence of conventional signals. No fleet-wide communication flares, no energy spikes, no displays of firepower. The Armada presented itself as a mass of ships, inert yet coordinated, a structure that could not be disrupted by aggression. Enemy commanders could see the human fleet, but they could not interpret it. Each human vessel was simultaneously autonomous and synchronized. Patterns existed, but only humans could read them. The enemy's own strategy, their confidence in symmetry and balance, became their weakness. Meanwhile, within the human armada, automated systems monitored enemy sensors, recording every detection method, analyzing response times, and evaluating shield resilience. Every subtle maneuver of the opposing fleet was logged and processed. Humans did not react with weapons, but with observation, adaptation, and refinement. Every moment of seeming inactivity was a calculation, a preparation for decisions the enemy could not predict. They built a mental map of the approaching adversary, not to fight, but to anticipate the exact points where weakness could be exploited. The enemy grew uneasy as patterns failed to emerge. Their doctrines, honed over millennia, assumed all species shared the same basic instincts: aggression, dominance, impatience. Humanity did not. They waited. They calculated. They prepared. Each pause was not hesitation, it was leverage, a tool designed to maximize the impact of action when it finally arrived. In their arrogance, the enemy assumed that delay was fear or uncertainty. In reality, it was control on a scale they could not comprehend. By the time the fleets drew within proximity, the psychological balance had already shifted. The enemy believed they held all the advantage. They thought humanity would charge, and they were ready to annihilate any frontal assault. Yet every movement of the human fleet had been designed to exploit that exact belief. The humans did not need to fire first. They only needed to be where the enemy assumed they would not, ready to apply force at the perfect moment. In the void of space, the invisible tension was enough to begin the unraveling. Every observation the enemy made brought them closer to the moment they would finally realize that humans had never intended to fight the way they expected. When the moment arrived, it did not announce itself. There was no volley of energy, no roar of engines. The Armada's approach had been deliberate, patient, almost imperceptible, and in that silence, the first fractures appeared. The enemy's formations shifted, sensors overloaded, and protocols failed to adapt. They realized too late that the humans had not deployed a conventional fleet. They had deployed a mechanism, a network, a system designed to turn expectation against itself. Every enemy maneuver, every countermeasure, every strategy was anticipated, studied, and inverted before it could even execute. Humanity's ships did not fire in unison, nor did they charge en masse. Instead, they triggered a cascade of disruptions. Shields were rendered useless before any beam reached them. Sensor arrays became unreliable, feeding false readings that spread confusion through enemy command. Drones, thought to be auxiliary, penetrated gaps in communications, severing coordination without direct combat. Every layer of defense the enemy trusted became a liability. They could see the human armada, yet they could no longer interpret it. What looked like hesitation was mastery, and what looked like disorganization was impossible precision. The collapse was not immediate, but inevitable. Enemy vessels attempted to engage based on prior doctrine, but each action triggered a calculated counter-response. Mines, traps, and field distortions rendered movement hazardous. Energy grids overloaded in patterns humans had mapped decades earlier, destabilizing entire fleets. Ships collided, shields failed, and command centers faced cascading failures. No human was directly pulling a trigger at most of these moments. The Armada itself was a self-operating weapon, designed to function autonomously and relentlessly. As panic rippled through enemy ranks, humans maintained absolute composure. No signals, no communications, no broadcasted warnings. The Armada moved as one, but not visibly. It was a storm of coordinated intent, invisible until the consequences manifested. Enemy commanders attempted to regroup, redirect, and counter, only to discover that every maneuver they could conceive had already been predicted, neutralized, or turned against them. The universe seemed to bend around human strategy, not through magic, but through meticulous preparation, patience, and an understanding of expectation. The psychological toll was as lethal as the physical. Aliens trained to command fleets over millennia found themselves immobilized by disbelief. Their doctrines failed, their training betrayed them, and their numerical superiority counted for nothing. Every decision that relied on predictability was now a liability. Communication networks fed corrupted data, shields failed when they were needed most, and once coordinated formations became chaotic maelstrom. What should have been an orderly battle disintegrated into panic before a single decisive strike had been executed. Humanity applied the minimum necessary force to achieve maximum effect. Not every enemy vessel was destroyed, some fled, some were incapacitated. The Armada did not hunt for kills. It neutralized threats with surgical precision, preserving energy, resources, and structural integrity for what came next. The principle was clear: domination did not require annihilation, only demonstration of capability so complete that resistance became irrelevant. The moment the first ships faltered, the rest of the fleet understood they had no choice but to comply with reality. By the time the enemy realized the true scale of their failure, it was over. Control had been wrested without conventional battle, without prolonged destruction. The human armada remained intact, composed, and ready. The galaxy, watching silently, understood that humans had achieved victory not through aggression, but through intelligence, preparation, and the ruthless application of foresight. The 900,000 warships had never been the weapon themselves, they had been the instrument of inevitability. In one calculated instant, expectation became defeat, and the universe learned a lesson it would not soon forget. The enemy fleets that had once been unstoppable were scattered, crippled, and mute. Communication networks remained fragmented, shields burned out, and command hierarchies no longer existed. Humanity did not celebrate. There was no triumphal broadcast, no fanfare, no displays of dominance. The Armada remained in formation, silent, waiting, not out of pride, but because there was no need to. Victory had been achieved not by aggression, but by the meticulous execution of preparation and principle. The galaxy had been taught, and the lesson was complete. Surviving alien observers recorded every outcome, every anomaly, and every calculation they could reconstruct. Entire civilizations re-examined doctrines, questioning assumptions they had held for millennia. What had appeared to them as weakness, hesitation, or delay was revealed as strategy so precise it bordered on incomprehensible. The human species had demonstrated not only resilience, but the ability to weaponize intelligence, foresight, and patience in a way no one had anticipated. The fear they now felt was not immediate, it was deep, institutional, and permanent. Humanity returned its focus inward, stabilizing supply lines, repairing systems, and recalibrating fleets. Not a single vessel was lost unnecessarily, not a single system overextended. Every surviving asset was preserved, maintained, and reinforced. This was not arrogance, it was prudence. The lesson humanity imparted was clear: dominance does not require waste, and power without control is meaningless. Every ship in the Armada now carried more than weapons. It carried proof that discipline, patience, and preparation could achieve what raw force could not. Alien intelligence communities began to circulate new theories. Humans were unpredictable, their logic alien to traditional strategy. They could not understand how an entire species could coordinate on scales that approached omniscience. Every scenario they tested, every simulation they ran, failed to reproduce the precision they had observed. The 900,000 warships had not been just a fleet, they had been a statement, one that no words could encapsulate. Other species spoke in hushed tones, wary of provoking what they no longer comprehended. Humanity's silence became louder than any battle cry. On Earth and across human-controlled space, the population absorbed this new reality without boast. There were no parades, no monuments, no chants. History was written quietly, in records, in architecture, in preparation for the future. Knowledge of what had been accomplished was stored, analyzed, and integrated into education for generations. Children grew up understanding that power is responsibility, and that patience is as lethal as any weapon. The galaxy had witnessed human ingenuity applied with perfect precision, and that knowledge became a cautionary tale for anyone who assumed Earth could be subdued again. The Armada itself never disbanded. Ships remained operational, fleets poised, not out of aggression, but as a reminder. Humans had demonstrated that the universe could be challenged, that consequences could be exacted without chaos, and that survival demanded far more than brute force. Civilization had endured the unendurable and emerged not just unbroken, but refined, disciplined, and infinitely more dangerous. In the aftermath, humanity spoke not with weapons, but with results. Silence became their statement, patience became their power, and presence became their warning. The galaxy learned that the species it had once underestimated was no longer merely surviving, it was defining its own rules. Every observer understood that future interactions with humans would require caution, respect, and recalculation. Humanity did not seek revenge anymore, for the act itself had been completed through execution, discipline, and inevitability. The universe would remember, and every calculation from that day forward would carry the shadow of human precision. The lesson was simple: underestimate humanity at your peril. Survival had made them patient, preparation had made them invincible, and discipline had made them inevitable. What had been intended as vengeance had become a demonstration of mastery over expectation, and the galaxy understood it instantly. The humans who had endured annihilation had not only answered, they had rewritten the rules.